So there's a new vampire movie out called Abigail, but did you know it started its life as a Dracula's Daughter reboot? Now, Dracula's Daughter is one of the classic Universal Monsters films. It's the direct sequel to the Bela Lugosi Dracula from 1931, but this film came out in 1936, and it focuses, well, of course, on Dracula's daughter. Now, back when Universal was trying to form their dark universe, you remember that? A universe of classic monsters that was kicked off with Tom Cruise's The Mummy in 2017. Absolute cinematic masterpiece.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
But they started developing a Dracula's Daughter movie, but it was abandoned that it would have any kind of continuity with the other films around the time that they abandoned the dark universe. And now we have a Dracula's Daughter movie that's in line with The Invisible Man that Leigh Whannell made back in 2020, where it's a classic monster reboot that's very original and has very little in common with the classic it's jumping off from. So now we've got Abigail, which is about a group of professional criminals who all go by code names named after people in the Rat Pack. When I heard a Rat Pack joke, I knew this movie was made for me. But they're hired to kidnap the daughter of a mysterious rich guy. They bring her back to a house to hold her until they get the ransom money. But there they find out she's a vampire, and it's a big trap to get her some food. How's it going, my friends? Welcome again to the Cobweb channel. My name is Daniel, and I was really looking forward to going to see this movie because I love vampire movies. It's actually my favorite subgenre of horror. I'm right now doing a series on the channel, a big old ranking series where I'm ranking vampire movies under different categories. And here we've got a brand new vampire film that I actually heard some people say the trailer's ruined by revealing that it's a vampire movie, and that should have been a surprise. Honestly, I think that's dumb. Like, what? We can't know a vampire movie is a vampire movie and then get hyped up for it as vampire movie fans? I mean, gosh, back in the day, a movie would come out called Kiss of the Vampire and people would be happy. Like, it's okay to know a vampire movie is a vampire movie. Everything doesn't have to be from dusk till dawn. Now, the movie is directed by the Radio Silence guys, a couple of directors who go by the name Radio Silence, because back when they were trying to get stuff made, they would send out scripts, send out whatever to executives, and when they would ask each other, hey, have we ever heard back on that? They would just say, Radio Silence. And they took that as their name. I think that's pretty cool. But their names are Tyler Gillette and Matt Bettinelli-Olpin. And they did make the last two Scream movies, Scream 5 and 6. But most importantly, they made a horror comedy called Ready or Not that I was actually a huge fan of. And Abigail definitely has a lot more DNA from Ready or Not than it does the two Scream movies. So let's talk about what I liked about Abigail, starting off with the cast and the characters. Now, I love this cast. I almost feel like this cast was assembled just for me. Now, our lead character, Joey, is played by Melissa Barrera, who's an actress I'm actually a huge fan of. I became a big fan of her back when I saw her in the Heights, which was a musical that didn't make a lot of money at the box office, but I loved it. I thought it was fantastic, and I thought she was the standout performer in it. She's also the lead character, Sam Carpenter, from the last two Scream movies, and honestly, she's the main reason that I'm a fan of those movies. Like, I really came to love her character, be fascinated by her character, particularly in Scream 6, and now that it's big news she's not going to be in Scream 7, I honestly have very little interest in that movie, but now that she's starring in Abigail instead, I think she's coming out the winner in that whole situation. She was so great in this movie. She's really the main character, not because she's our perfect, pure final girl, but because of all these criminals, she's definitely the one that has the biggest moral compass. She's not a perfect character for sure. She's got a dark past. All these characters do, but she's the one who is the most strong in terms of wanting to do what's right, even in a terrible situation. Now, the leader of all of these criminals is played by Dan Stevens, who I'm also a huge fan of, specifically from The Guest, which is a fantastic horror, action, comedy, drama, an amazing genre mashup that came out back in 2014. He made such an incredible splash in this movie. And ever since this movie, he's turned out to be such a chameleon who can play so many different kinds of characters. But honestly, I think he's never been as good as he was in The Guest until Abigail. Gosh, I love him in this movie. I mean, he practically steals the film. He's so much fun to watch. Just such a tough badass, as most all of these characters are. But where his character goes, man, it was just such a great arc. It was so satisfying for me. And I also love that when we find out his real name, it's Adam Barrett. And The Guest was directed by Adam Wingard, written by Simon Barrett. So that was a pretty cool Easter egg for a nerd like me. You've also got Katherine Newton in this movie, who I've been a fan of ever since I saw her in the comedy Blockers, but just recently recently she was in Lisa Frankenstein, which I just thought she blew the doors off with that performance in that movie. And Kevin Durant also turned out to be a big standout in this film as well, who's basically the big muscle of the gang. But, you know, I've been listening to interviews with the cast and the directors and such, and it just seems like he was the sweetest guy on set. Everybody loved Kevin Durant. But okay, I like the directors, I like the cast. How is this as a vampire film? Is it satisfying? You know, I was a little concerned about that going in, because from the trailers, it just looks like our only vampire is a 12-year-old girl, specifically a 12-year-old ballerina. Why is she a ballerina? You know, I think the main reason is so the movie can open with a certain piece of music from Swan Lake. And if you don't know, that is the piece of music that opens the 1931 Dracula with Bela Lugosi. There is no piece of music that I associate more with vampires than that piece from Swan Lake. So I was so happy when this movie kicked off with that.
So good.
This is the kind of vampire movie that can satisfy most modern audiences, but right there they connected with the classic horror gothic vampire fans such as myself, and I was so happy about that. But who is this 12-year-old vampire? Well, she's played by an actress named Alicia Weir, and she blew me away in this movie. I mean, this is an Irish actress, so she had to do an American accent through the whole thing. She's not a ballerina, so she had to learn ballet through months of rehearsal to prepare for this movie. She was so sympathetic when we see her at the beginning as a little girl. Now, if we've seen the trailers, we know she's a vampire from the start. But even so, that first half hour or so before the vampirism really kicks off is so much fun, because we, the audience, know what's really going on, but it's fun watching these characters figure it out and figure out a lot of wrong things too, and watch them go down the wrong paths to figure out what kind of situation they're in. It's honestly super entertaining, and she's great in that section, but once she's a vampire, holy cow, she brought it. She was menacing. She was ferocious with the contact lenses and the teeth out. I mean, this is a vicious vampire. This is a bloody, gory vampire movie, but always in a fun way. That's one thing the directors talked about a lot in interviews.
We don't ever want it to feel so real that it feels cruel or mean.
About how they wanted this movie to be a hardcore horror. They wanted blood, gore, but they always wanted to keep a tone where the audience would have a good time the whole time. And they nailed that. This movie was always fun, no matter how bloody it got, no matter if our vampire is doing a dance with a headless corpse. Yeah, that's pretty fun. But oh man, there really is a lot of blood here.
30,000 liters of blood.
It's crazy, and it's practical. The special effects in this movie, if they used any CGI, I could not tell. It all looked like practical effects for me. And that was almost totally confirmed by these interviews that I was listening to, because for a certain effect in this film that's used a few times, they use something called blood cannons that would basically just explode blood all over the set. And they would have to do those shots in one take, because if they didn't get it in that first take, it would take an astronomical amount of time for them to clean up all of this blood and then restart, rather than just have to clean up once if they can get it in one take. That's a big reason that a lot of movies use CGI blood these days. You get to avoid all of that hassle, but I respect it. This movie did not take the easy way out. They went back to old school filmmaking, horror filmmaking, the kind of thing we horror fans love. Real blood all over the set, exploding, gushing all over our actors.
It was so hard physically. Hardest thing I've ever done.
They're putting actors through the ringer to do things for real. There's like prosthetics and like little animatronics for certain gore effects. It's so cool. Like, I was so satisfied as an 80s horror fan who loves the kind of practical effects they did back then. This movie brought it in that category. And in those interviews, whenever they would refer to the main vampire movie that was the biggest influence, they reference The Lost Boys. But honestly, I didn't see much of any Lost Boys in this. I mean, I almost think Lost Boys is like first and foremost a hangout 80s teen movie and a vampire movie second. No, the movie I saw in this much more was actually Fright Night, which is my favorite movie of all time. So that made me really happy. I mean, they almost totally recreate the most iconic shot from Fright Night in this, which was cool for me because that's not overdone. No matter how iconic that shot is, not a lot of movies kind of take reference to it, which I thought was fun. There's more little Easter eggs that as a Fright Night fan, I was really happy to see. But hey, I started out by saying this was supposedly a Dracula's Daughter movie. So that's a classic monster movie. So how satisfying is it as a Dracula's Daughter reboot? Well, much like the Lee Winnell Invisible Man, don't expect almost anything in common in terms of plot. But honestly, it's a little more satisfying than I was expecting it to be, especially by the end. The whole third act of this film is some of the most satisfying vampire content I have seen in a 21st century movie at all. I was so incredibly happy with the directions they went. And yeah, by the end, not a bad Dracula's Daughter movie, I gotta say. If you're a classic monster fan, you're feeling a little skeptical about that with this movie, I would kind of put your worries to rest. This did turn out to be one of my top favorite vampire movies of the 21st century. Now, that isn't quite as high praise as you might think it is, because the 21st century is not my favorite time for vampire movies. I'm much more of an old school vampire fan, but from this time period, Abigail is one of the best. Let's go ahead and rate Abigail. Now for atmosphere, I'm going to give this a 7. It's definitely got better atmosphere than a lot of modern day horror movies, and that's because they shot this in an actual house. This is a real house in Dublin. There were just a couple of rooms that they built sets for. They're overall just using this giant, spooky, kind of gothic mansion, which I thought was really great to see. Now, I do have to lower it a little bit because I'm not going to say it's like one of the most atmospheric vampire movies you're going to see. Definitely not, but better than average with a pretty cool location they're shooting in. For characters, I'm going to give this a 9. I have no complaints. I loved these characters. They all have distinct backstories that are all interesting. Most of them that makes them a little bit more sympathetic, even though they are hardened professional criminals. Even the backstories, like, they feel organically woven in. It doesn't feel like you're just getting an exposition dump into your face. The characters are often funny. There's a lot of good laughs. They're also distinct, and the actors are perfect. Every actor absolutely nails their role. I really have no complaints. I'm just not giving it a 10 because I gotta save that for vampire movies that have some of my absolute favorite characters of all time, like Fright Night, like Bram Stoker's Dracula. You know, I'm not gonna say Abigail is at that level, but for what it is, it absolutely nails it. For story, I'm gonna give this a 7. It's simple, but it's so effective. Criminals kidnap a girl. Girl turns out to be vampire. It's a trap because she wants to drink through them. Like, simple, you can explain it real quick, and it always stays on target. It never deviates into side plots or anything like that. I just really respected how effective this movie was, and at an hour and 50 minutes, never felt like it was wasting my time, never felt like it was a little bit too bloated. Now for scares, I'm gonna give this an 8. Now, was I ever actually scared in this movie? No. I've seen a lot of horror movies. I am a desensitized shell of my former self. Not a lot scares me these days, but if you're a regular viewer of this channel, you might have figured out that this scares category, it's not rating how scared I got, it's really rating the quality of the horror content, the satisfying stuff that's going to satisfy you as a horror fan. And Abigail's got it in spades. The blood, the gore, always a lot of fun, really intense, you know, almost action sequences. I'm hesitant to say action sequences because I don't want you to think this is like a Blade kind of thing, because it's definitely not 100% a horror movie all the way, but just very intense sequences of characters going up against a vampire. Really brings it in that category. I don't think the movie ever has any like jump scares or anything, which I know people bash on jump scares a lot these days. I actually respect a well-crafted, effective jump scare, and I don't think this movie ever really went for that. But in terms of just being a fun, blood and guts vampire movie, Abigail's got it. Overall, I'm going to give this movie an 8. Recommend this to any vampire fan or even just horror fan. But did you see Abigail, or are you interested? Let me know down in the comments below. Let's talk about this movie. And if you want to stick around the channel, check out this video right over here. I did a review of Late Night with the Devil just recently, another horror movie I really enjoyed. Give a like if you enjoyed this video and a subscribe for more videos like this. Thank you so much for watching. With all that said, don't forget to enjoy yourself today, have some fun, and I will see you next time.